Isildur took it, as should not have been. It should have been cast then into Orodruin's fire, nigh at hand where it was made. But few marked what Isildur did. He alone stood by his father in that last mortal contest, and by Gil-galad only Círdan stood, and I. But Isildur would not listen to our counsel. At length, Elrond and Círdan convinced Isildur to at least go into Samath Naur, and debate the decision to destroy the ring where it was forged. The year was 3441 of the Second Age, and the High Kings Gil-galad of elves and Elendil of men had just been slain by Sauron in the War of the Last Alliance, but Isildur had used the Shards of Narsil to slay Sauron. Outside of Mount Doom, the warriors of the West were finishing the final battle of the War of the Last Alliance. Within Mount Doom, Isildur weighed his options. He could destroy this beautiful and powerful ring that the Dark Lord had made, only because the elves had wanted it. Or he could take it as a wergild for the deaths of his father Elendil and brother Anarion, and with it he might become powerful, exceeding the strength of his ancestors of old in Númenor. The draw was too powerful, and all that the elves Elrond and Círdan might say meant naught to Isildur, so he chose the latter option, to take the ring as a wergild. The elves would just have to accept this. Elrond looked at Círdan with a great sorrow and fear in his eyes. They knew not the full extent of the power of this ring, but Elrond and Círdan knew that Sauron had survived the downfall of Númenor, even though he had drowned with the island. If Isildur took this ring, a ring of power that the Dark Lord had made in secret to control all others, an evil would come upon men and the West, and Sauron would find a way to return. But perhaps next time they would not find a way to defeat him, as they had this time. As Isildur turned to leave Samath Naur, Elrond reflected deeply. He thought of his father Eärendil and mother Elwing. Their actions had saved the world in the previous age, for they had brought down Morgoth and his dragon and Celegon the Black by uniting the Free Peoples. Perhaps the Free Peoples would not be united after this, but they would indeed be free and saved from the darkness nonetheless. Thus, Elrond acted swiftly, and before Isildur could leave Orodruin, Elrond pushed the heir of his brother Elros into the fire, for he knew he would not be able to convince him to spare himself and destroy Sauron's ring. And so the One Ring was ended with Isildur, and Sauron would never again return to Middle-earth. But evil still lingered there. After his dark deed, Elrond glanced at Círdan, who shook his head in sorrow and proclaimed, "Alas for this world, and the evil that shall come to its peoples. Mine is the gift of foresight, son of Eärendil. I shall not say your actions here were not necessary, for they prevented a great evil from returning to the world. But I should say that they brought an end to elvendom in Middle-earth, and they herald a new woe for our people. Take this here ring, Narya, the Ring of Fire, and wear it with Gil-galad's ring Vilya, the Ring of Air. I shan't fight in this war, and I will only provide ships so our people may escape into the west. May Eru save you, and Mandos forgive you, my friend." And so Elrond and Círdan emerged from a now erupting Mount Doom, and they found their way to safety among those fleeing the mountain. When they had found cover, the people of Gondor and Arnor asked for their High King. Before Elrond could speak the truth or conceive of some lie, Otar, the squire of Isildur, ran to the crowd from behind the two elf lords. "I have seen fire and murder. I saw our lord Isildur go into the Mountain of Fire, and before I could join him, treachery befell our High King. His uncle of many sires, Elrond, pushed him into the fire without warning, and brought him to ruin. Elrond was terrified, for he saw the strife he caused between the children of Ilúvatar." Without much time to object, the battle-hardened men were upon the elves, even as the Eldar of Lindon, Imladris, Loranond, and Greenwood the Great retreated back to their homes. Men pursued them for a long time, but grew weary of the chase, for the feet of the Eldar were more unceasing, and their strength of endurance was far greater than that of men. Besides, the men were tired and sorrowful from battle, so ere long they gathered their dead and memorialized them. Their three kings, Elendil, Anarion, and Isildur, had been slain in this war, so they remembered them. However, for men, not all hope was lost. They realized that the Ring of Berger had been lost with Isildur, and that symbol that held friendship between elves and men had been lost. But the shards of Narsil, the sword that had been forged by dwarves for men, were recovered from the spot of Sauron's defeat. The dwarves would eventually be needed in this fight. As for the line of kings among men, Isildur and Anarion both had children. And so Meneldil, son of Anarion, became the new king of Gondor, and Elendar, the eldest son of Isildur, became the king of Arnor. Since the disaster of the Gladden Fields never occurred in this timeline, all of the sons of Isildur yet lived, and Valandil was now, as it seemed, held hostage by the elves of Rivendell in the north, for Isildur had left his son and wife there during the war. And so Elendar, king of the north, and Meneldil, king of the south, planted a new white tree, the sapling that Isildur had saved from Minas Ithil, in memory of their forebears, and they swore an oath of abiding loyalty and friendship between Arnor and Gondor in Iru's name. They swore too to have vengeance on the elves, forgetting that the ancestor of their white tree and the palantiri they used had come from the elves. They forgot their loyalties and love for the eldest children of God. As for Elrond and his folk, a white council meeting was held between all of the wise and the lords and ladies of the Eldar from each land. Círdan, Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn, King Amroth of Lorinond, and King Thranduil of the Greenwood all gathered in Rivendell. They debated the best course for their kin after they were told of Isildur's death and the reason for it by the hands of Elrond. Elrond ultimately wanted to make amends, returning Valandil, son of Isildur, and his mother to men, and he desired to explain the situation to them. But Círdan and Galadriel were wise beyond measure, and they knew that there was no peace to be made, so they voiced the opinion that all of the elves should leave the land and sail west while they could, for the elves, even combined, were too weak to defeat men, the descendants of Númenor, in all of their fury. For the elves had lost so much over the course of the ages, and the War of the Last Alliance especially, with the downfall of High King Gil-galad. Nor would the elves want to face men, for they were the second-born children of Ilúvatar, and it would be as an elder sibling fighting or slaying their younger sibling. It would be as disgraceful as the kinslayings to engage in such a war, for it would directly violate the will of Ilúvatar for his children. The elves discussed many options, but ultimately many of them would sail to Valinor while they might, before they could commit atrocities that would shame them from the west, or be slain themselves. Others would stay and find some way to neutralize themselves with men. Galadriel gave Nenya the Ring of Water to Elrond to join the other 2 elven rings, and in doing so she passed her test and was allowed to go west. And so she did, and Celeborn, her husband, went with her. Círdan planned to leave also, but only after the elves who desired to go west did so, and after he had no other choice but to leave. Ere a year passed, and the Second Age lingered on, the elves had strengthened their borders as to defend themselves. There had been skirmishes between elves and men in the wild, and while there were more men about than elves, the elves were skilled fighters and held their own. But it was as Galadriel said, if brought to all-out war, men would eventually win over elves due to their numbers and fury. Elrond decided he would try to negotiate peace with men, for that was his only viable option. If Elrond could just tell them of the danger of the One Ring and Sauron, perhaps men could forgive him and his folk for the death of Isildur, for they should know that, by his life, a greater evil was forever ended. Elrond sent messengers of peace to Arnor and Gondor, and they were received and heard, even if they were captured as well. Then all elves who would go with Elrond, even those under the rule of King Amroth and King Thranduil, would go to Eregion, a neutral place, a place where Sauron had slain the elves in days of old, to meet with men and discuss terms of neutrality and the evil that they had vanquished. Círdan did not join them, for his loyalty was now with the elves who wanted to sail home. The meeting of peace was convened between the kings Elendar and Meneldil, and the elven lords. As a sign of goodwill, Elrond released Valandil and the wife of Isildur back to Elendar and his brothers, and then he explained his actions and why he had slain Isildur. Some men seemed convinced, but others, such as the kings Elendar and Meneldil, held a solemn expression throughout the council. For all these men knew, the elves could be making up tales to save their kind. Even as Elrond was telling his tale, distant horns sounded in the east, and all looked to see an approaching host. The mighty Khazad, dwarves of Khazad-dûm, had come, bearing a reforged Narsil for Elendur's use. The men rejoiced, and some cheered. Before this council, the men had sent ambassadors to Khazad-dûm to treat with the folk of Durin IV and request their aid. Men had been fearful over the past months, thinking that the elves had powers unknown to them that could best them. So the men lied to the dwarves, telling them that during the War of the Last Alliance, the elves had recovered a few of the 7 dwarven rings that Sauron had taken from other clans, as well as some other dwarf treasures. If the dwarves joined the men and pushed the elves into the sea, they might reclaim their treasures of old. Now again, this was a lie, and men would just give the dwarves the relics of the elves if they won as payment, and claim that the dwarven rings had been lost. And so, after the dwarves arrived in Eregion from the West Gate, war ensued. Men and dwarves against elves, and this battle was named the Dagor Iruhini, the Battle of the Children of Iluvatar, taking place in 3442 of the Second Age. The elves fought with sudden and surprising power, for this treachery reminded them of all they had lost in the Elder Days, and they battled as one would in a corner. But the fury of men and dwarves were unmatched even in their wars of old against Morgoth. For men fought their allies of old who had slain their High King, and dwarves fought for all of their kin who they thought had been wronged and stolen from by the elves. This battle in Eregion lasted well nigh a day, but men and dwarves held the mastery. Since the destruction of the One Ring, Elrond had realized that the 3 elven rings had lost their powers, and all that they had once done and preserved was failing. Even now, the 3 rings were of no use to him. Before long, the elves retreated, some to Rivendell and some to Lindon, so that they might leave Middle-earth and never return. Kings Amroth and Thranduil were slain, and the sorrow of this battle would become greater than that of the Nernaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Elrond would lead his people back to Rivendell, and with his powers he defended Imladris to the last. In the east, some dwarves from Khazad-dûm and some men of Gondor sacked Lorinond and Greenwood the Great. Eventually, the powers of the Eldar failed, and Elendur and Meneldil together slew Elrond and took his elven rings. The 3 were dispersed. Vilya, the Ring of Gil-galad, and Elrond went to Elendur, the son of Isildur, and Vilya, the Ring of Círdan, went to Meneldil, son of Anarion, and Nenya, the Ring of Galadriel, went to Durin IV. They wore these rings as nothing more than symbols of their victory over the elves. Elrond's body was paraded about, and men rejoiced, for they had avenged Isildur, their High King. In the west, even as men came to destroy Lindon, Círdan took the last ship into the west, looking back at the east with a great sadness in his eyes, as he saw his home of old burn. A dark evil had been stopped, he thought, but at the cost of creating a new vengeful evil. The Third Age began, and this was the age of men and dwarves. The last elves would live forever in Valinor with the Valar. The Valar would always look upon the elves in sorrow. The seas would be forever tumultuous, as Ulmo, the greatest friend of elves and men among the Valar in the Elder Days, was forever saddened and angered. But Melkor, outside of the walls of night, laughed forever in the void, for even without him or his servant, he had victory through the infighting between Iluvatar's children. Rain fell upon Middle-earth, and it would never cease, for these were the tears of Iluvatar, as his children had slaughtered each other. From this theory concerning what if Elrond had pushed Isildur into the fires of Mount Doom, we see that one evil would have been traded for another. Although Sauron would have been destroyed, it would have caused treachery and infighting amongst the Free Peoples, which in many ways would be far worse than the darkness enduring, but being defeated by the unification of the Free Peoples over 3,000 years later. Hey guys, Yoistin here, and I hope you all are doing well wherever you are in Middle-earth. And I hope you guys liked today's theory. I'm so glad you all enjoy my theories. They're quite fun and pretty interesting to make from the basis of what I know about Tolkien's works. This one was quite dark, and it is perhaps the darkest theory I have ever made. But indeed, I believe something like this would have happened if Elrond had killed Isildur in a way to destroy the One Ring. But it is just a theory, so this is only one way it could have gone. What do you all think? Would it have happened like this, or some other way? Let me know in the comments below. Also, please check out our music channel, Facebook, Twitter, merch, and Patreon for a Discord server and podcasts in the description below. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. And I will see you all again next week with a video on the Trolls of Middle-earth. Everyone, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.